This is the video that's going to take a look at chapter 14, which is the notes on cause and effect, also known as causation. So when I talk about a causation essay, I am referring to this particular mode. When you are writing in the causation mode, you are attempting to explain why something is happening. So the key word is why. And remember that essays that are primarily in this mode will often have the word why in their title, especially if they're taking a look at causes. But the causation mode can come in two different forms, three technically, and as we'll take a look at here in a moment. So you're either explaining why something occurs, or you're looking at what happens because of something, which would be an essay that's more about effects. So you might write an essay that tries to examine the reasons why a certain action occurred, why a certain event happened, why a certain attitude is out there in the world, why a certain condition exists. Keep in mind that you are not going to be allowed to do research. So if you are choosing to explain something, it needs to be something that you know intimately, that you can pull examples from out of your real life, that you can analyze carefully on a personal level without diving into research on the internet or research in books or anything to do with citing. I don't want papers that need a works cited list. So bear in mind that that is the same here. You might also, on the flip side of that, be interested in writing an essay that examines the consequences of something. And I would say out of the sample essays that I've given you in Canvas, the vast majority of them are essays that examine the consequences of some cause. Cause meaning, loosely, here's what starts it, and then you look forward and say, these are the effects that have come from this thing happening, this event happening, this attitude being in place. Here's the effect of it. So what's nice about essays that tackle these types of problems is that it helps us understand the world around us better, right? If we can understand why something's happening, then maybe we could prevent or anticipate similar consequences happening in future events. So we talk about the causes of the past so that we can avoid making similar mistakes in the future. Okay, real quick, I just want to show you and remind you of the picture. This was always one of my favorites to talk about in class because who really understands what's going on here? I don't know. But there's always some interesting guesses as to what's going on. So when we are dealing with essays of causation, we do want to think about specific patterns. So we're going to come back to this here in a moment. You have several options for different patterns, and they're all from pages 237 to 239. And so each one of them shows the basic pattern on the left and then a sample outline for how that might be used on the right. And so I'll go over them with you here in a moment. But they're each unique, right? So there's 4 different options for how you could put together an essay of causation. So first of all, you could take a look at single cause, multiple effect, right? Single cause, multiple effect. So when you do that, you're going to identify your cause in the introduction, and then your main body is going to walk you through all the different effects of this. Again, this is probably like the most popular causation essay outline type. So keep that in mind. Your next one is the flip of that, where you're looking at, here is an effect. Now, what caused it? So this would be like the sample essay that I have where you're looking at what causes franchise fatigue. So the effect is franchise fatigue, and the causes are here. And you've got a nice example with the zinc production there. Sometimes you are following what's called a causal chain, right? And causal chains need to be very specific. They're going to be like a domino effect. So you're saying that this first thing caused an effect, and then that effect itself became a cause of something else, and then there were effects from that. So take a look at how this functions here. You slept late, which made you miss breakfast. Missing breakfast means you became hungry and distracted, and then that made you perform poorly on an exam. So if you end up doing a causal chain, you definitely have to do something in chronological order because you're making the case that this thing led to this thing led to this thing. The examples that they give you are like, examining the causes of the Vietnam War. To me, that needs research. So this is perhaps why some of these papers are not as popular as others. Okay, most of the essays that I have as samples are either going to be essays primarily about causes or primarily about effects. You can end up talking about both, and that's this last pattern here on 239. But notice that it's going to revolve around one particular instance in time. You can talk about multiple causes that led up to something and then multiple effects that came from that. So in this case, they have a car accident. Here are the reasons why the accident occurred. Here's the effects of the accident. That can be done. And it doesn't have to be about accidents. It could be about something else. But in that case, you're going to want to talk about, again, notice that it's something that's very personal, right? It's something that you don't have to do research for. You're talking more about it probably with the intention of trying to help people avoid, or possibly even, if it's a good news, then maybe recreate a similar sort of situation. Okay. One thing that comes up with causation essays is that you have to be really careful in your logic. And so you want to make sure that you don't have any reasoning errors in your causal analysis, because that's really what you're doing. To analyze means to pick something apart. So you're picking apart the things that caused it. And so they have three main problems that they mention on page 240 and give examples then in exercises over to 241. One problem is if you ignore multiple causes. So if you write a paper that says that this one effect came from just this one singular cause, that's probably faulty logic, because our world is so complex that an effect rarely has one single cause. And anybody who ignores the possibility even of multiple causes is probably oversimplifying the situation, and in that case you'd have an ethical problem. One thing that can occur in these papers, though, especially since you're only writing right around a 3-page essay, 3 pages, 4 pages, something like that. If the time frame that you have to work with or the number of pages that you have to work with doesn't allow you to go as in-depth as you want to in the discussion of all the possible causes, what you do is acknowledge the existence of all the multiple causes that you know in the introduction, but then say, for the purposes of this paper, I just want to go into this one. So that is one way in which you could narrow your focus to one singular cause without having a problem ethically by saying only this one thing caused the effect. So you're acknowledging the all the possible causes involved, at least you're naming them, but then you're only going in depth and talking about one. The second common problem, is mistaking chronology for causation. Chronology, remember, means time order. So there can be instances where just because something happened first doesn't mean that it caused the other item. So be very, very careful. Your textbook links this into the idea of superstition, right? So you better have evidence. You better make sure that you know that your one element caused the next one. Otherwise, you might be feeding into some sort of negative stereotype and superstition that is, again, ethically a problem. You can also have situations where you are confusing the causes with the effects, and they've got some examples of that on page 240 and 241. And so looking at those exercises, I think, would be a good idea. Basically, the exercises on 240 and 241 just help you to think clearly about, am I talking about causes or am I talking about effects? Because you want to make sure that you understand which element of this causation essay you're talking about so that it's clear for your readers. Okay, ethical issues to think about. You want to think about the importance of the causes that you have named, because you don't want to potentially name a cause and then make it out to be a big deal when it's not really a big deal. So be careful of how you are framing some of those ideas. You want to make sure you haven't left anything out, right? It's not okay to leave something out ethically. Again, you go back up to here. If you don't have time to talk about it, at least you have to acknowledge its existence. Otherwise, you aren't being ethical. Think about, have you discussed every important effect, even the ones that might make it look like this is not a good idea for you to talk about in your paper. Sometimes you need to address things that potentially challenge your ideas, but one of the things that you're going to learn over the course of English 102 is that when we allow other people to challenge our ideas, we actually come out stronger. So instead of avoiding something that at the surface level looks like it breaks your ideas in two, there's my alarm, instead make sure that you face it head on. Okay, and finally, what would be the consequences if people actually acted on my analysis? Because remember, we do this so that we can think about avoiding things in the future. So think about the consequences if people actually follow your analysis, and are they ethical and acceptable? So when you're planning and drafting, you want to make sure that you're going to signal at the beginning of the essay whether you're going to speak about causes, you're going to speak about effects, or you're going to speak about both. So it should be really clear in your introduction. Your organization depends upon the topic. Order of climax, once again, comes up as something really good because you can work your way into important causes, but you can also reverse that and talk about the most important cause first and then on down to the least. If you are doing a causal chain, you must use chronological order, so keep that in mind. And finally, and this is really important, especially for your organization grade with transitions, you're not just listing out causes and effects, you're showing relationships between the concepts. So the relationships are going to be structured best by really solid transitions. So keep that in mind. You've got excellent flowcharts here and lots of help in the textbook for picking a topic. Don't forget to look at pages 244 for that flowchart and then the one at the end. I just think you got a lot of good material here, and if you have any questions about how to put it to good use, let me know.